So today we're going to take a look at how to build a house design in Adobe Photoshop using basic shapes. To start with, we want to build our canvas. We're going to go to New File, top left side. And I'm going to choose from the presets at the top navigation. I print with the standard size letter paper, 8.5 by 11. We're going to change our orientation to landscape. For our background contents, we're going to change from white to transparent. This will allow us the freedom to build out our background for the scene and apply effects as we go. Once we have the established orientation and transparency, we're going to click Create. And with our platform, we're going to be taking a look at the different tools that we can use in Photoshop. The main tools that we're going to focus on are the Rectangular Marquee Tool, the Elliptical Marquee Tool. And the nice thing about Photoshop is they show you how the tools work if you just move your cursor over top, allowing this little thumbnail to give a sample of each tool. We'll use the Polygonal Lasso Tool. If you don't see the Polygonal Lasso Tool, it's located in the same panel as underneath of the lasso tool itself. But this is clicking point by point, allowing us to be as precise as possible using straight lines. And if we need to select certain areas, the fourth tool, left side navigation, if you click and hold, we'll get to the magic wand. Magic wand will do well of selecting out areas if it is a flat color or does not have any color in it. So if I were looking to use the magic wand and I wanted to select the entire background, all I have to do is go over to the artboard, click, and we can see the dotted lines on the exterior of our file. But for now, I can deselect. If using a PC, it's Control-D, or a Mac, Command-D. We're going to first look to build out our initial background. Currently, because we have a transparent background, we have layer 1 down on the bottom right side of the layers. We see the layer panel down the bottom right side. We will use the effects down below, as well as getting into adding in new layers in a little bit. Over in the top right side, we have the color picker. This will allow us to modify our foreground. We can see the sample down the bottom left side, and our background, if we choose on the background, very easy to modify and adjust to whatever color setting you are looking for. If I want to go to this light blue, just a matter of adjusting on the hue bar, this rainbow bar on the right side, and just selecting out which background or foreground you want to work with. You can easily adjust to the color of your preference. But to begin with, we're going to start out with layer 1. And I'm going to rename this grass layer. With the grass layer, we're going to go over to the Rectangular Marquee Tool, second tool, left side navigation. And about the bottom 2/3, I'm going to look to select out just this 1/3 of the page and look to fill this in with a either standard green, flat color, or I can look to use a gradient. Over on the left side navigation, I'm going to go down towards the gradient tool. If I click and hold, I can get to the paint bucket. And with the paint bucket, I'm going to look to select out a green color, and I can start out with a flat green at first. If I want to fill this in with the paint bucket, it's all a matter of choosing the paint bucket and click inside the area. It automatically fills into that space. If I would like to add a gradient, it's a matter of switching over to the gradient tool located in the same location as the paint bucket. And I'm going to switch out my background color, get a lighter green color. Now you can see that I have a dark green and a light green. With the gradient tool and the area selected, if I click and drag inside of the area, I can see how the gradient is going to apply. I'm going to drag my gradient top to bottom for this. And you'll notice that I have a currently black and brown. This is a preset of the color from another project. So if I want to switch this, I'm going to go to the top left side navigation, click on the drop down, and I'm going to choose under the basic settings. If I choose on the light green, dark green, it's very easy to click and drag over the area. We see how it applies onto our file. If I want to adjust the gradient and get into drawing it the opposite direction, I can go from lighter green to dark green. If I want more vibrant colors, it's up to you to kind of choose what works for you. There's no limitation. You don't have to follow the color schemes. Make it your own. Once I have the area for the grass, you can look to apply some effects. Down at the bottom navigation, I can add a layer style. This little FX icon represents the layer styles. If I click on this, I'm actually going to go to the blend options. And with the blend options, I can look to apply some effects. For a standard effect, I'm going to go over to our pattern overlay. With our pattern overlay, you see that it automatically puts in a picture of leaves. We can adjust this pattern to make it work better for our design. First, we're going to look to change our pattern out. We have the option of choosing trees, grass, or water. Obviously, we're going for grass, so I'm going to adjust over, click the drop down for grass. I get a more overhead shot, more brown and green, or a more standard type of turf. With the turf, yes, it works, but it's a little bit too strong. I want to look to create a blend to still make this look like it is an illustration. So I'm going to look to drop the opacity of my pattern overlay, drop about 40%. I can also look to play with the scale of the texture, just to make it look like a texture and not overwhelming us with a visual image. You can see as I bring up the scale, it gets too large, it looks like grainy, but lower, it gives us just a nice little texture to make it its own. So once I'm satisfied with the texture, I can click OK. It's important that we maintain this layer of grass as its own. We don't want to apply different layers onto the same layer, especially now with an effect on it. If I were to try to add the sky in the same layer, it would also apply that same pattern. I do not want that. So we're going to look to add a new layer. Down on the bottom right side, the little square with the plus sign, create new layer, and I'm going to rename this sky. With the sky layer, we want to look to select out the top portion of our image. For the top portion, if I would like to use the Rectangular Marquee Tool, I can click and drag across the area that I want to draw out the sky. Or we could also use the Magic Wand tool. If I deselect, Control D on a PC, Command D on a Mac, the Magic Wand, fourth tool, left side navigation. If I select on the area, it's going to select the entire area. Understand that we're going to have to move the sky layer behind the grass if we do adjust or apply a gradient onto this layer. But to get an example, we're going to click on the gradient tool, and I'm going to look to modify my foreground color and my background color. So I can click on the foreground. I'm going to adjust this up to a light blue. And then click on the background color and adjust this up to a darker blue. Now when I look to draw out my sky gradient, again, I can use the gradient tool, click and drag downward. And we see how it transitions, but to really see it with the grass, I'm going to look to move my sky layer underneath of my grass layer. So over in the layers panel, all I'm doing is adjusting the layer up or down below the grass. So again, just below the grass, this way it allows us to be able to have some freedom. If I don't like how the gradient is transitioning, I can always redraw it out. Maybe have the darker side on the bottom. Depends on what you're looking to do. Now that we have our sky, we have our grass, we're going to add in the sun. We're going to look to create a new layer. and rename this sun. Over on the left side navigation, we're going to go over to the Elliptical Marquee Tool. Second tool, left side navigation. And we can draw the sun anywhere within our scene. If we want to have it fully visible, we can draw a circle. To draw out a circle, we want to make sure to hold Shift to maintain a perfect shape. Or if you'd like to have it run off the page, I can start from outside the canvas, click and drag, and again hold Shift if you would like it to maintain its symmetry. But now that I have the area drawn out, I'm going to look to fill this in. You can use a gradient or you can use a flat color. For this, I'll just use a flat color. So I'm going to go over to the paint bucket tool. I'm going to adjust my foreground color over to a yellow. And I just want something that's going to be light, work well with the light blue background. So once I have the color selected, I can use the paint bucket and just click inside of the area. I'm going to deselect, Command or Control D. And now with the sun layer, I want to make this a little bit softer overall. There is a very harsh edge. Yes, you can keep it simple like that, but we want to see how complex or how many additional elements we could add. So I'm going to look to add an outer glow onto the object. If you want to bring your blend options or your layer style onto a layer, rather than going down to FX, if you double click on the layer, double clicking down on the bottom right side in the layers panel, it'll bring up the layer style so we can apply some effects. For our sun, if I would like to test out some different options, I can see how they work. The one that I'm going to focus on particularly is the outer glow. With the outer glow, when I do click, you may not see the results right away. I can start to see this little glow effect around the edge, but I'm going to adjust the saturation up. We can see that the orange is a little bit stronger right now. But I'm going to make this a little bit softer, blend it in a little bit better to our sun shape. Go into more of a yellow. And with my opacity, I'm putting up to about 75 or 80, just so it is strong enough. And I'm going to look to test out the spread and the size of the outer glow. You particularly want to take a look at the size. The spread will give it a harsh separation from the sky, so be careful not to pull that too high. But to get a glow effect, I want to adjust on the size itself. You can see as I expand out to the right side, moving up the size of the pixels, we get a nice glow effect happening on the edge of the object. I click OK when I'm satisfied, and now I'm going to look to create a new layer above all the rest of my layers. Click on the plus sign down at the bottom of the layers panel, and I can rename layer 1 house. When it comes into building out our house design, we're going to start out with the rectangular marquee tool. Second tool, left side navigation. With the rectangular marquee tool, I want to build shapes together. So we're going to look to combine shapes, two rectangles, possibly for a garage or an addition on the house, just to show that we are not just doing a basic square shape, but seeing how far we can show this design. To do this, I'm going to look to click and drag across my page. It starts out with one square shape. If I want to add an additional shape, I have to hold down Shift on my keyboard. And you'll see a plus sign appear when you hold down Shift. This will allow me to draw out a second shape. And when I release with my mouse, it combines into one shape. So again, if I deselect, just go through the process again, click and drag to draw out one shape. And I'm drawing into the grass area. The house shouldn't be on the horizon line, but I'm going to hold down Shift, click and drag to create out a second shape. If I don't like the shape, I can always hit Command or Control Z, allow me to undo. And again, I can hold down Shift click and drag to redraw out the shape. Once I have the shapes for the main portion of the house, I'm going to also look to draw out a roof line. Give myself a triangle at the top to show the roof. Over on the left side navigation, we're going to go to the third tool, left side, Polygonal Lasso Tool. Click and hold if you see the lasso. With the Polygonal Lasso Tool, I'm going to start outside of the actual area of the square on the top left side. Again, you have to make sure to hold down Shift on your keyboard. I'm going to simply click a point, move over to relatively central of the rectangle shape. Once I have the angle that I'm looking for, I click another point, then move down to the bottom or to the top right side of that shape. Once I'm satisfied with the location, click a point, and then I want to go back to where I started. To know that we're closing a shape, we want to see this little circle appear on the cursor. Once I'm satisfied with the spot, I can click, and we see that it's now combined together into one shape. Now that I have the area drawn out, I just want to fill this in with a color. You can pick out any color house, just a matter of really seeing how the shapes are built out. So a light brown house for today. If I want to fill this in, I can use the paint bucket, left side navigation, about midway down. And all I have to do is click inside the area and it fills into that space. We can add other details a little bit later on when it comes into the roof line or any other elements. But for right now, I'm going to look to deselect, Control or Command D. I can always adjust the placement of an object or a layer, adjusting by using the Move tool, first tool, left side navigation, click and drag it into the location you're looking for. To build out additional elements, I'm going to look to add another layer, and I'm going to call this new layer Window. With the window, I'm going to look to put multiple different windows into the shape. I'm going to go over to left side navigation, clicking on the second tool, Rectangular Marquee Tool. I'm going to click and drag to create out a window shape. And if I would like to focus or zoom in on a certain area, you can always hit Command or Control plus sign. It allows us to zoom in, focus on the object, or Command Control minus to zoom out. But this allows me to focus on a little bit more details. With the window layer, I'm going to look to place a gradient inside of this, just so it gives a little bit of separation from the original design. If I go over to the gradient tool, left side navigation, I'm going to go to the top navigation, click on the drop down where I see the sample of the gradient that I currently have. Instead of using the basics, I'm going to go into the blue presets that they offer, just seeing what type of presets that you can choose from. So there's a number of different options you can choose from. I'm going to pick out something with a little white shine. If I would like to adapt or modify any of these colors, I can click directly on the sample on the top left side. And if I want to adjust on the color, double click on the gradient editor. I'm going to make this just a little bit lighter so it stands out. I'm going to click OK. And click OK again on the pop-up for the gradient editor. And if I want to apply any type of effect, just to test out what it looks like with the gradient, I click and drag, and we see how it applies into that area. If I want to change my gradient, at the top navigation, we have radial gradient, angle gradient, mirror gradient, and diamond gradient. With the mirror gradient, it will allow me to be able to draw out another area, adding in another shine. So it's not just necessarily a flat gradient. So consider adapting your gradients to see what type of features you can add onto the detail. So we first have our initial window. I'm going to, again, Control or Command D, deselect. If I would like additional windows, I can look to hold down Alt or Option on my keyboard. Alt, ALT, or Option on your keyboard. I can click and drag using the Move tool to replicate and make a second window. If I hold Shift while dragging to the side, it will maintain proportional layout so it's staying even on top to bottom. And again, holding down Alt or Option, click and drag over the side, I get an additional window for the right side. If you need to adjust the placement, you can always click and drag. I'm going to reduce it down just a little bit, just so it's balanced and even. But now with a few windows, again, I can continue to add more and more windows throughout the design. I'll look to put a door in the middle at one point. But we can also look to add in some other features. If I want to add in windows over on the secondary portion of the house or the garage area for me, again, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, click and drag, but I can look to modify or skew the shape. If I hit Command or Control T, with Command or Control T, this is a transform tool. When you hit Control or Command T, it will bring up this bounding box around the object. If I look to scale the object, it's going to maintain proportions. I can scale it down to make it smaller, or I can look to hold down Shift while dragging, and it will allow you to modify or distort the shape to your preference. So I'm going to use this distortion to allow me to create out some windows that could possibly go on the top of a garage door. If I hold down Option again, click and drag. If you're satisfied with the shape skew, then I can hold down Option again, click and drag over to create a second one, or as many as you prefer. Again, holding down Alt or Option. Now, if you take a look at my layers, I have a number of different windows. If you want to keep it organized, you can put it into a subfolder, compiling all the different layers of the windows. Clicking on the folder icon, it groups them all into one single folder. So just understand that you can keep a little bit more organized, but for right now, I just want to keep all these single layers. I'm going to look to add, again, more details. I'm going to create a new layer and call this window frame. For a window frame, I'm going to zoom in on my first window. I'm going to look to build out a frame shape to make more detail for the design. Over on the left side navigation, clicking on the Rectangular Marquee Tool. I'm going to click and drag to create out a rectangular shape. And you can see I'm going a little bit outside of the window frame or the window itself. But we're actually going to look to cut out an area so we can focus on getting the inside being transparent. If I hold down Alt or Option on my keyboard, you see a minus symbol appear. This means that I'm cutting out an area within the selection. So if I click and drag, I'm leaving this little basically border around the outside frame. And if I wanted to fill this in so you get an understanding, I'm going to look to fill this in with white. There is a default setting in which I can choose my foreground and background, setting it to black and white, the standard. But I'm going to switch, clicking on the double arrow so that the white appears as my foreground. And if I want to fill in this window frame, you can go over to the Paint Bucket tool. And we can just click directly inside of the area, and it adds this white frame. If you want more details for a window frame, I go over back to my Rectangular Marquee Tool. And with I'm going to deselect, Control D. And I can look to draw out window panes or help create that separation of window panes. Click and drag with the Rectangular Marquee Tool to create out a long rectangle. And I'm also going to look to add 2 frames for the top and bottom of the window. So I can hold down Shift, brings up the little plus sign. I can click and drag. I'm going to try to do my best to make them as accurate as possible. And again, over on the bottom portion of the window, click and drag. And you see, because I held shift, it allows me to combine them into one shape. And now I can fill this area in again with the paint bucket tool. I have the white foreground, I click inside. And now when I deselect, you see I have a nice frame around the outside of my window. Again, you could also look to put in a little bit more details. If I did decide to put a drop shadow or an effect on the window frame, I can double click. If I wanted to try to bevel and emboss, be careful not to overdo it, but if I click on the bevel and emboss features, I can look to adjust the size. Just add a little bit more three-dimensionality, create a little bit more interest around the actual object. It just helps to make it stand out, protruding off the page. And this is using an inner bevel, so my depth is about 200% based on the size that I have, and size just about 2 pixels. I don't want it to be necessarily strong, just adding in a little bit of sense of shadow. Once I'm satisfied with it, I click OK. You see it's a nice frame. Now I can look to apply this over to the other areas. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, click and drag over the side, and again sit this over top of my other windows. If you'd like to build out smaller ones, I'm going to put a garage door, so I don't necessarily need this, but I'm going to look to create out a new layer, and we can create a door. With our door layer, I'm going to look to use the Rectangular Marquee Tool. I can click and drag to create out the shape for the door. And again, I want to make sure that I have separation from our shape, so I'm going to fill this in. You can, again, choose out any color you prefer. Maybe I'll do a dark door just so it stands out. I can click inside, filling in the space. And if I would like to draw out maybe a frame for the door, again, create a new layer. I'm going to go over to the Rectangular Marquee Tool. Start on the top left side, click and drag to create a rectangle. I'll zoom in just so I can be a little bit more focused and you can see the details. Once I have the left side of the rectangle, I can hold down Shift, click and drag to create out the top portion. And then if you mess up, you can always hit Control-Z to undo, or Command if on a Mac. I can hold down Shift again to add in a selection. I'm going to drag this down to the bottom of the door. Do my best to maintain the correct width. And now that I have the frame around the door, I can look to fill this in as well. Again, using the paint bucket, and click inside the area. Right now I have this blue color, but I'm going to switch this over to white. And again, click inside the area itself. We can always add more details, but it's just a matter of getting the basics and understanding how the tools work. I'm going to create a new layer, and this time I'm going to look to just put a large white rectangle that's going to sit as our garage door. Click and dragging over the area that I want to focus on. With the garage door, I'm just going to fill this in with white. I can use the paint bucket to fill in the area. Because it's at the top layer, it blocked out my windows, but just understand you can move the layer. I'm going to hit Command-D to deselect, but move the garage door below my windows over the layers panel. A shortcut key on your keyboard. If I hold Command or Control and then hit the left bracket next to the P key, I can move this layer down below. And as I tap, whether it's the right bracket to move an object up or left bracket to move an object down, you can see how it's going to move on the layers panel, adjusting the layer below other objects. A couple additional elements that we're going to take a look at is adding in clouds and adding in a bush shape. To be able to do this, again, we want to create a new layer. So at the top of all my layers, I'm going to add a new layer, and we're going to call this bush. For a bush, I'm going to look to bring this in possibly like the front side of the window. I'm going to zoom in just so we can see a closer look. And we're going to use the Elliptical Marquee Tool, second tool, left side navigation. To draw out the shape, I'm going to first look to draw out a circle shape. With one circle, I'm going to hold down Shift and get the plus sign to appear. And then I'm going to look to draw out multiple circles that are going to overlap each other. This will allow me to create the bushiness for the plant. Whether you want to make them tall, wide, that is up to you. But it just helps give that round element and make it stand out, so it's not just one flat shape. So once I'm satisfied with the shape overall, I want to look to fill this in. I'm going to look to change out my fill color. I can use the color in the top right. I'm going to pick out more of a neutral green, so it's not too strong. Right in the color picker, and then use the paint bucket to fill in the area I've just drawn out. Now that I have the area drawn out, we want to take a look at how we can add a little bit of dimension to the object. So we're going to look to take a look at the dodge or burn tool. Dodge or burn tool, the dodge will allow me to highlight some areas, while the burn tool will allow me to burn some areas, darkening up some areas. So if I take a look at the burn tool, I can click and hold, choose the burn tool. You can adjust the size of your brush using the right or left bracket. So if I want a bigger area to burn, tap right bracket, and then make a smaller brush, left bracket. So you can adjust in between. You don't want to work too large. It does process or take some time to process. So a smaller brush will allow you to be able to get a little bit more accuracy. But with the brush layer selected still, I can click and drag inside the area. Again, if I'm not satisfied with the size of the brush, I can adjust. But as you go over top of areas, you're going to see that it starts to burn over the object, adding in a little bit more dimension. And the more times you go over top of an area, the darker it gets. So if I continue to go over an area, you see that you get that real separation, that real shadow sitting underneath the object. So I'll do this in the middle of the plant as well. Once I have some shadows, I can also look to add some highlights. I'm going to again switch over to the dodge tool, located in the same location as the burn tool. And clicking a few times, you can get some little white highlights just to add in that more dimension. So if I take a step back, Command minus, you can see how it just does add a couple shadows and highlights on the object. If I want to darken this up, again, I can always go over top of the area, go back into the burn tool. I'm going to go to a larger brush. You can see I can actually apply effect over top to make it all stand out a little bit darker. Let me drag over. Once I'm satisfied with the shape, I'm going to deselect, and we can actually add in a couple bushes onto our house. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, click and drag over. Now I can look to put this underneath the window, or maybe I want to have a few bushes. So again, holding down Alt or Option, you can overlay, let them stack over top of each other. If I'd like to select multiple objects at a time, I can hold down, click on an object, hold down Shift, and click on the other object. I can adjust it to the location that I want. So we have a couple bushes. We're going to look to add two more elements: a driveway and a cloud, or a walkway up to the door. To do this, we're going to create a new layer. Because we went with the bush, we're going to look to now add in a cloud shape using the same process. I can rename a new layer, cloud. And this time I'm going to focus more on the top right side. Again, using the same process, Elliptical Marquee Tool. Click and drag to create out a couple of circular shapes that are going to overlap. I'm going to try having a relatively flat bottom and allow to add in other cloud shapes or more puffs on the top portion of the cloud. So to fill this area in, I'm going to look to fill it in with white, or if I want to draw out a second cloud at the same time, just move over to a new area. Again, hold down Shift, click and drag to create out a shape. Once I have that area drawn out, and I look to change out my foreground color to a white, I can use the paint bucket to drop into that area. Right now you can see that the cloud is appearing in front of the house. Again, I can move this layer down, holding Control or Command, and then left bracket, adjusting it down below the house layer. And again, we can look to use the burn tool to darken up some areas, create more of a three-dimensional cloud. But with this time, we want to change our settings for our burn tool. At the top navigation, we have range. We want to switch it over to highlights because we're working with the white. It's not going to appear unless we change our settings to highlights. So if I click and drag over the area, I can get some shadows. I can adjust the size of my brush if needed. If you feel like it's too strong, I can always hit Command or Control Z, undo. And this I'm just going to drop my exposure so it's a lot lighter when I go over top of an area. It's softer. It adds a nice soft shadow on certain areas of the cloud. So I have a couple clouds. If I deselect, Command or Control D, it has a nice overall look for the scene. Just think about the overall composition. We want to have a driveway or a walkway that's going to allow us to get the full sense of the aspect. I'm going to look to add a new layer at the top navigation, at the top of my layers panel, and it's going to be below my bushes eventually, but I can build it first at top. I'm going to go over to third tool, left side navigation, Polygonal Lasso Tool. With the Polygonal Lasso Tool, I can draw out the shape of the object. Clicking point by point, it allows me to get exact accuracy of what I'm looking for. For my walkway, I'm going to look to draw something that connects to my driveway. I'm going to go to the edge of the garage door, and I'm going to expand outward towards the bottom, showing that it has distance, that is depth. So it's not just a flat object, but I'm thinking about the dimension that goes into the shape. I can always hit backspace or delete on my keyboard to undo a line that I'm not satisfied with. So if I accidentally click too many times, again, just hit backspace or delete. But once I get the correct angle, I'm going to look to draw out the final elements and then connect back to where I started. So to fill this in, I can change out my foreground color, get something more of a stone or cement look, or pick out whatever color combination works for your design. But I can use the paint bucket to fill in this area. And if you would want to add a pattern or texture, I can look again, double click on layer 1, which will be my driveway, and I'm going to look to add a pattern. But with this pattern, I'm going to change it over to more probably the water effect out of the options that are provided for us. It helps to create more of a stone aspect. For the opacity, I don't like the blue tone that's being picked up, so I'm going to look to change my blend mode in my pattern overlay. And I can go through the options in the blend modes. See how it's going to affect the design or change the design. I like the overall look. It still has the brown tone now using luminosity, but the opacity is a little bit too strong, so I'm going to reduce that down just so it comes off more of a brick or stone. So you can think about the other elements that goes into your design. I may want to add a roof line or show some type of brown to create separation. So the final aspect, I'm going to look and call this roof. With the roof layer selected, I can go over to the Polygonal Lasso Tool. Similar to how we drew out the frame for the windows, I'm going to click a point, build out a shape that's going to represent my roof. If I connect back to the beginning, we close that shape. And then I'm also going to look to draw out a front view roof for the right side of my house. So I'm going to see more brown over on this side. And again, connect back to where I started. I'm going to use a brown color just so it has a little connection to the house. Go over to the orange tones. Select out the area and use the paint bucket to fill in this area. If I hit Control or Command D, deselect, I have an overall initial house. Obviously, we can always add in more details, but this is just a matter of understanding the basic tools to help build out a house design using Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Best of luck.